Goodness and mercy are following me, bringing me into the light.
Goodness and mercy are following me all of the days of my life.
Goodness and mercy.
Goodness and mercy are following me.
He's bringing me into the light.
Oh, what a companion.
Oh, what a friend.
What a friend.
He's faithful.
Faithful every morning until the end.
Our first reading is from the book of Psalm 119, verses 1 through 8. Blessed are they whose ways are blameless, who walk according to the law of the Lord. Blessed are they who keep his statutes and seek him with all their heart. They do nothing wrong, they walk in his ways. You have laid down precepts that are to be fully obeyed. Oh, that my ways were steadfast in obeying your decrees. Then I would not be put to shame when I consider all your commands. I will praise you with an upright heart as I learn your righteous laws. I will obey your decrees. Do not utterly forsake me. Our second reading is from Matthew 5, verses 21 through 37. You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, "Do not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment." But I tell you that anyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to judgment. Again, anyone who says to his brother, "Raka," is answerable to the Sanhedrin. But anyone who says, "You fool," will be in danger of the fire of hell. Therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled to your brother, then come and offer your gift. Settle matters quickly with your adversary who is taking you to court. Do it while you are still with him on the way, or he may hand you over to the judge, and the judge may hand you over to the officer, and you may be thrown into prison. I tell you the truth, you will not get out until you have paid the last penny. You have heard that it was said, "Do not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. It has been said, anyone who divorces his wife must give to her a certificate of divorce. But I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, causes her to become an adulteress, and anyone who marries a divorced woman commits adultery. Again, you have heard that it was said to the people long ago, "Do not break your oath, but keep the oaths you have made to the Lord." But I tell you, do not swear at all, either by heaven, for it is God's throne, or by the earth, for it is his footstool, or by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great king. And do not swear by your head, for you cannot make even one hair white or black. Simply let your yes be yes, and your no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one.
Good morning. After the heavy snow last week, the sunlight seemed to be brighter yesterday. And I wondered why. So, as I usually do, I searched the internet. So our Dr. Google said, there is more moisture in the sky. This enables sunlight to scatter more. So the sky appears to be brighter. There's a science behind it. So in our life, no matter how strong storm might be, we should never forget the sun shining behind the darkness of the storm. The darkness of the storm does not mean that there is no sunlight. We just don't see it for now. What we need are the tools to survive the storm. And God gives us two tools to survive the storm. One is God's assurance. God promises us that God will send sunlight eventually. But second of all, the good people around us is the tool that God gives to us to survive the storm. So as we greet one another now, let us share good hugs and words of appreciation for being there when we were in the storm in the past or even now. So let's all rise and share our greetings with one another in Jesus Christ. After 6 months on the job, the new employee believes he deserves a fat raise. So he goes to his boss and tells him about a raise. The boss asks, "And how much of a raise do you want?" The employee says, I'm thinking an extra 50 grand a year. The boss nods. Sounds about right. And what would you say to a package of 5 weeks of vacation, extra vacation, and 14 paid holidays? And a company car leased every 2 years, say, red Corvette. The employee sits up straight and said, "Wow, are you kidding me?" And the boss says, "Yes, I'm kidding, but you started first." In a sense, Matthew chapter 5 through 7, which is called the Sermon on the Mount, makes us feel the response of the boss. We tend to overestimate our competence and values than others. Many employees are convinced that they are doing a great job, but they get a mediocre performance appraisal. Many students are sure they take the test well enough to achieve a high score, but they wind up with a C or D. We tend to love ourselves, forgive ourselves, and be more generous to ourselves than we do to others. Some psychologists explain the reason. When we talk about ourselves, we open our subconsciousness and subconscious minds. If we praise ourselves, the subconscious mind takes notes, and we end up feeling better. When we make mistakes, we are generous to us because we know the context of the mistake, like the inevitability of the mistake. We are less generous to others' mistakes because we don't have the same tool to analyze their contexts. However, unlike our attitudes toward our own issues, to improve our self-awareness or to develop our life strategies is not the purpose of today's passage. Jesus asked his followers more fundamental questions and explanations of what he means by a righteous life. As we covered for the last couple of weeks, Jesus begins his sermon by introducing the Beatitudes, describing what kind of life he calls blessed. It is not a comfortable life. It is not easy life, nor a prosperous life that Jesus calls a blessed life. A blessed life means to love God and to rejoice in the promises of God in any circumstance. A blessed life is to pursue God's righteousness of loving and caring for the weak and the vulnerable, rather than putting my own glory and honor first. Then Jesus reshapes their identity by declaring that they are called to be the salt and the light of the world. Even though they are just poor peasants living at the periphery of an oppressed country, Jesus assures them they are no less than the children of God. It is almost like him saying that the disciples of Jesus are like movie stars walking on the Oscars red carpet. People are watching their movements and listening to their words. As you may know, a Korean movie won this time. I'm proud of it. The words and behaviors of Christians are supposed to be done in the same way, as if they are watched by the people of the world. If you read today's passage more carefully, you'll find the unique beginning of each part as Jesus opens up a new topic. In verse 21, Jesus says, "You may have heard that blah, 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 but I say to you," and blah, blah, blah. The same expression appears in verse 27, verse 33 and 38 in chapter 5. So we can understand that the second part of chapter 5, starting from verse 21, is to give some examples of a righteous life. More specifically, in the previous verse, Jesus said, "Unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven." People believe that the religious leaders had a right of ownership to the righteousness of God. When Jesus mentioned the salt and the light of the world, they assumed that the religious leaders are the good examples. However, Jesus refused their assumption and urged them to have surpassing righteousness of the Pharisees and scribes. So today's passage shows us 4 examples of what it means to have surpassing righteousness, how our righteousness surpasses those of the Pharisees and the scribes. There is a dividing line between true righteousness and false righteousness. In 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 1 through 5, Paul says to Timothy, his disciple, "There are people in the last days who have a form of godliness but deny its power. There are people who have the form of godliness but deny its power." And Paul says to Timothy, "Avoid such men as this." When Jesus said, you may have heard that, he was talking about Jewish teachings, 2 of which were from the 10 Commandments, and the other 2 were from the laws in Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy, with some modifications by ancient commentaries such as Midrash. Jesus used the traditional teachings on murder, adultery, and prayer as essential grounds for building his case for righteousness, implying that these teachings can be extended into almost every areas of our life. So let's start with the first example. You shall not kill is among the 10 commandments, as we know. Everybody in the audience was familiar with this commandment. You shall not kill. And most probably, they heard of this commandment from the religious leaders too many times. Jesus implied that there was a huge gray area between killing and loving the people. When God gave the commandment, you shall not kill, to the Israelites, it was a minimum moral imperative to maintain the community, not the maximum. It was a minimum guideline and minimum trust to establish the sense of unity. It is like living in a small town where kids return home alone and have no fear for their safety, even though there is no parent at home. You shall not kill is the minimum. But it does not promise their path toward the beloved community. The chasm between the commandment, you shall not kill, and another commandment, you should love God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and you should love your neighbor as yourself. Between those commandments, the chasm is too big to see from one tip to the other. Jesus knew the people too well, so Jesus introduced 2 bridges to connect these two. To move one step away from from committing murder, Jesus extended the case to anger, hatred, and mockery. To be angry with a brother and a sister is same as murder. To call someone raka makes one liable to the council, and to say moron to others makes one liable to God's punishment. That's what Jesus said. This is the first bridge to connect. Do not kill, and love your God. Love your neighbor as yourself. First one, all the bad words, bad emotions against each other is a part of killing. The second bridge is to emphasize the importance of reconciliation. Jesus said, if you bring your sacrifice to the altar and you remember your brother had something against you, leave your sacrifice there in front of the altar and go and be reconciled to your brother. Then come back and offer your sacrifice. It is more urgent than worshiping God because it is the pathway towards proper worship that is acceptable to God. Let me ask you a question. What do you have in mind when you hear 2 commandments at the same time? You should not commit murder, and you should love your neighbor as yourself. Where do you put your focus on? Try to remember when you were a child. Your parents might have said these things all the time. Don't fight with your brother or sister. And second one is, you should love your own brother or sister. Then which rule did you take more seriously? I guess the former, because there were punishments reserved for breaking rules. However, I'm sure it was not what your parents really wanted. The question we should ask ourselves is not how we avoid the worst case, but how we move forward, move toward the best requirements of love. This is the fundamental human problem, which is we lose the image of God in ourselves, and we feel okay with it. We deem the minimum requirement of it as sufficient, whereas God's original intention is to restore the image of God in ourselves. In other words, God expects us to consider, what kind of person should I become? But our basic question is, what is the list of do's and don'ts in order to avoid God's punishment? These two attitudes are totally different. In the same way, Jesus talked about adultery. The commandment, you shall not commit adultery, is among the 10 commandments. But Jesus explained it to remove the gray area. People might consider, as far as I don't violate the minimum requirement of the law, I'm innocent. What is the result? We are living in a society in which sexual harassment is prevalent and normalized in the name of culture. Attitudes, norms, practices, and language, all of these tools are used to objectify women's and men's bodies as mere sexual objects, not as the ones created in God's image. Jesus pointed out that to avoid the minimum rule is not the final goal of the kingdom of heaven. Folks, the fundamental question Jesus raised for us is where our life is going. If we think that what we consider and decide is only of our own accord, we are wrong. If we think that to avoid the punishment of God is our goal, we are wrong. We have to start thinking and understanding the weight of our identity as the salt and the light of the world, to enlighten people's mind and to help them see the kingdom of heaven. Then we finally understand what Jesus means in verse 17, which is a couple of verses before, that he does not abolish but fulfills the law. Jesus said that in verse 17. It is not just our behaviors that breaks God's commandment, but our attitudes, our emotions also fall within this scope. In the same way, it is not just our behaviors that accomplish God's commandments, but our attitudes and our emotions are directed toward that direction. After all, our attitudes and emotions are shaped by the direction of our life, our self-identity as the people of the heaven, not of this world. In conclusion, the righteousness of the kingdom of God is more than following rules. It requires and empowers a life surrendered to God and neighbor. Jesus wants his disciples to be the people of integrity, with their hearts transformed by the Spirit of God. Are we there yet? Is this who we are now? Because of this conclusion, the last verse of today's passage is more meaningful than it looks. Verse 37 says, "But let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond this comes from the evil one." The people of God are the people of integrity, who keep their eyes on relationality rather than behaviors. They treat and see their neighbors as the bearer of the image of God, whether or not they are Christians yet. To boil down this resolution of relationship to a mere list of do's and don'ts misses the point Jesus makes here. To extend the call to integrity, we also have to consider the meaning of yes, yes, or no, no in verse 37. German theologian Dietrich Bonhoeffer interprets it through the concept of lordship. He said, "We have only one master now. Your yes to God requires your no to all injustice, to all evil, to all lies, to all oppression and violation of the weak and poor, to all ungodliness, and to all mockery of what is holy. Your yes to God requires a no to everything that tries to interfere with your serving God alone, even if that is your job, possessions, your home, or your honor in the world. Belief means decision." Brothers and sisters in Christ, I'm one of the people who believe that our society has been losing common decency and respect in our socio-political discourse. I think this is a huge problem to all people, from children to old people, because it creates huge impacts on human relationships in general within the society. It makes our conflicts and disagreements look worse and non-negotiable than they actually are, because we are exposed to it too much through internet and media. People rather give up the effort to bring people together and to discover the common ground because they have grown frustrated or apathetic about exaggerated conflicts. We are also living in a society in which the 6th and 7th commandments are violated way too easily. Death and sexual violence are so common and epidemic, which brings fear to those whose cities, villages, and neighborhoods suffer the violence. However, my hero, who I loved very much in my college years, John Stott, said, "We should not ask what is wrong with the world, for that diagnosis has already been given. Rather, we should ask, what has happened to salt and light?" We Christians need to turn our focus from how can I avoid ways to upset God to what kind of person God expects me to be in the world, and what kind of community we are called into. Somebody said, when you are in love, make sure you really are in love. And not just in love with the idea of being in love. Do you understand what I say? When you are in love, make sure you really are in love. And not just in love with the idea of being in love. We are called to cultivate love we learn from our God in the world, beginning from this community of faith, our families, our neighbors. I didn't do anything wrong. It's not what God wants here from us. We do our best to bring the kingdom of heaven into reality, is what God aspires to hear from all of us. Amen.